Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Bible Study. I'm Anita Watts. I am the adult Sunday school class teacher at Alexandria Baptist Church, and I'm glad you've chosen to be with us. Today's been a very busy day for me. We did family pictures this afternoon and all came back to my house and did chili and ball games, roll tide, and so it's just been real busy. I'm a little late getting started. And I'm glad that you have chosen to be with me today. We've been in a unit entitled A Fresh Look at the Ten Commandments. And last week we talked about how the first four commandments dealt with our relationship with God. And then number 5 was kind of a bridge between our relationship with God and our relationship with each other. And now we're on to session 4, which is honoring life. Respecting human life is something that God expects us to do. We are to do it as He does. He is a respecter of all human lives. Our passages are from Exodus 20 and 1 Samuel 26, 7 through 11. I would say that most people would think that they value human life. But in our culture today, we are struggling in some areas about human life because we don't all agree with the definition. Some people argue over whether we should have euthanasia, mercy killings when someone is terminally ill. People argue over whether people who can't take care of themselves anymore, should they be euthanized? We argue over when an unborn baby is viable. We don't call them babies. We call them fetuses. That makes it easier to dehumanize them if we call them fetuses. So you see, we're struggling in our culture today with something that God made something easy. It should be easy to say all human life should be valued. In our passages, the very first passage is Exodus 20:13, and it is one of the commandments. And then we will go on into a story about David when he first becomes king, and when he's first anointed by God as king. And we will talk about how he chose to obey that commandment. Let's look at Exodus 20:13. It is simply, "Thou shalt not kill." It's one of the shorter commandments in these passages. Very simple. Don't kill. Well, we might say, "Oh, that's easy. I don't do that. I've never killed anybody." Guess what? God says if we have anger in our heart toward our brother, that we might as well have killed him, because that's how He's going to judge us, that we have committed murder in our hearts. Now, that doesn't mean, okay, I'm going to be judged for that anyway, I'm going to go ahead and do it, because you can ask forgiveness for that. But I just want us to not get all uppity thinking that, okay, yay, I haven't broken that commandment, because we probably all have at some point in our lives been so angry with someone else. We might not have said we could kill them, but we've been pretty angry. I know all of us have had that kind of anger from time to time. The Hebrew terminology, the adverb is lo. It's a negative that can be translated no, not, or never. Thus, a literal translation of the Hebrew in this verse could be no kill or never kill. Just don't do it. Never kill. It can be defined as referring to unauthorized taking of human life for personal reasons, or murder, as we call it today. The crime of murder relates in part to human beings made in the image of God. Speaking to Noah after the flood, God commanded, "Whoso sheddeth man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. For in the image of God made he man." He made us in his own image. Therefore, he does not want us to hurt each other. We are made in the image of God. Would you kill God? That's a strong question, but if we're made in his image, if we kill each other, are we not killing God's image? God also made a distinction between murder and killing as the prescribed penalty for various crimes. God commanded the Israelites to put to death those who committed crimes such as murder, adultery, idolatry, and human sacrifice. So, I know anytime I hear someone talking about abortion being wrong because it's taking a life, it never fails that someone who is pro-abortion will say, well, what about the death penalty? Y'all don't have any problem with killing somebody that's received the death penalty. Isn't that killing too? That is the kind of punishment that God himself prescribed in the Old Testament. So, no, it's not, the death penalty in and of itself is not wrong. However, killing an unborn baby is. In the New Testament, the Apostle Paul noted that governments are established by God and authorized by him to use the sword. They are the minister of God, a revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. They administer justice against those who break society's laws. You know, another way that God has sanctioned killing is in the case of armies when we have to go to war because it's either do that or protect ourselves. God does not approve of going to war just so that we can kill, but he does expect us to take care of ourselves. Human life is precious to God and should be precious to us. In the next verses, we see that we should respect life by acknowledging God's authority over it. This is the story of David in 1 Samuel 26, 7 through 11. So David and Abishai came to the people by night, and behold, Saul lay sleeping within the trench, and his spear stuck in the ground at his bolster. But Abner and the people lay round about him. Okay, we picked up kind of in the middle of this story, so I need to give you a little bit more background. David has been anointed and chosen by God to be the next king. And ever since that has happened, Saul, his father-in-law, who is the present king who was anointed by God, has been angry and trying to kill David to keep that from happening. He doesn't want to give up his throne. So in order to keep that from happening, he has been trying his best to kill David. So right at the beginning of this story, David and his nephew Abishai, who is also the commander of his army, go into, with a small group, into Saul's camp at night. And if we go on past the section we're reading today, it says that God caused all of Saul's soldiers to go into a deep sleep, including Saul himself. And David found them in a trench, and typically in a camp, where a military camp, you would see equipment and animals first, then you would come into the soldiers, and the commanders would be at the back or the very center of the camp where there is more protection. Well, it just so happened that when God caused them all to fall asleep, David and Abishai come walking up on them. They're just walking through, looking around, and it says that they walk right on up to Saul, and he's laying there with his bolster. Now, a bolster is a big pillow that kind of supports everything, and when you're laying on the ground, I guess it supports your head. And it said that Saul's spear is stuck in the ground right there. When in other areas in the Bible, it says that Saul always had a spear at hand. Many times we see him throwing his spear. In fact, in the palace, he has thrown his spear at David twice, trying to kill him. But that must be his weapon of choice, because it's got it always right there beside him. And then it says, Abner and the people lay round about him. Abner was Saul's commander of his army. So now that you know the backstory, let's get on into it. So they've walked right on up into their camp. Verse 8, Then said Abishai to David, God hath delivered thine enemy into thine hand this day. Now therefore let me smite him, I pray thee, with the spear even to the earth at once, and I will not smite him the second time. Abishai saying, Look, everybody around here is asleep. God has given you your enemy. Let me take care of this for you. I'll do it with his own spear. Let me take this spear, and I won't have to do it twice. Abner was very confident about his abilities, and he knew that he could just take care of a small Saul in one fell swoop. However, David said to Abishai, Destroy him not, for who can stretch forth his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? That's an interesting turn of events, because you see, Saul at one time had been anointed by God as king of Israel. And so David is saying, no, we cannot do this, because he's been anointed by God. So we cannot kill him, because we will be guilty. And then David said, Furthermore, as the Lord liveth, the Lord shall smite him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall descend into battle and perish. So what he's saying here is, God will take care of it. It's God's place to take his life, not mine. It's not my responsibility to take his life. The Lord forbid that I should stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. But I pray thee, take thou now the spear that is at his bolster, and the cruse of water, and let us go. So he says, we're not doing this, because I'm not going to be the one found guilty of putting my hands on the Lord's anointed one. That's God's job. Only God has the authority to take a man's life, and I am certainly not going to get myself in that kind of trouble. He said, let's just take the spear, and we take the cruse of water, and let us go. Cruse of water is like their water bag. So, two things he takes of Saul's: his spear, his ability to defend himself, and his water, which would keep him alive. So, let's see what happens next in our story. In the next verses, we see that we are to respect life by treating every life as equally valuable. 1 Samuel 26:22 through 25. And David answered and said, Behold, the king's spear, and let one of the young men come over and fetch it. Okay, so David is talking to Abner now. They have crept away back to their hillside, and he's yelling down at Saul's army and Abner, his commander. He's saying, I have Saul's spear. I have his water bag. Send someone down to get it. The Lord render to every man his righteousness and his faithfulness. For the Lord delivered thee into mine hand today, but I would not stretch forth mine hand against the Lord's anointed. In other words, this is proof I could have killed you today and gone about my business, and no one would have known until the morning. The Lord delivered you today, but I chose not to smite the Lord's anointed. And behold, as thy life was much set by this day in mine eyes, so let my life be much set by in the eyes of the Lord, and let him deliver me out of all tribulation. Saul, for as much as I have taken care of your life today, and I have chosen not to kill you, let my life be the same way in God's eyes. Let him view me that same way and spare me tribulation. Then Saul said to David, Blessed be thou, my son, David. Thou shalt both do great things, and also shalt still prevail. So David went on his way, and Saul returned to his palace. You know, at some point, he asked David to come back to him, but David knew better. In this moment, Saul says, I'm done with this. And he goes back, and he, for the moment, is finished. But David doesn't trust Saul, because there have been too many times that Saul has gone back and forth like this. So he knows that Saul will never stop. So he just goes on about his way. He just wants Saul to know that he had the opportunity to kill him, but he chose not to. And at least for the time being, Saul realizes, I need to leave him alone. And he chooses to go his separate way. Consider how we can live out this truth and how we honor all life. David chose to honor Saul's life. How can we live out that same truth? To act justly includes doing so toward the vulnerable, seeking to protect their lives. Think of people that are vulnerable, people who have mental health needs, people who have special needs. How about our elderly who don't have anyone helping them? All of these are vulnerable, especially in today's society when life is teetering in the balance right now. There are people that would choose to say, if you can't make a viable contribution to our society in taking care of yourself and providing for yourself, then there's no need for you to be here. And that is sad, because we're talking about the people who have taken care of us growing up. We're talking about people who fought wars for us, for the freedoms that we have. And yet we would choose to take their life if they're not viable. To love mercy involves consistently and faithfully pursuing life and liberty for those who are at risk of losing both. Let's think of some other people whose lives may not, people groups. We still have racism in our country today. We have classism. There are people who think the poor should no longer be with us, even though Jesus said, the poor you shall always have with you. In my mind, that means they're always going to be here, and it's our job to take care of them. None of their lives are any less important than yours or mine. Every single life was created in the image of God. You are no more important than any other person you run into on a day-to-day basis in God's eyes, because He created us all in His image. To walk humbly means we consider others more important than ourselves. That would take care of it all right there. Being humble and always taking care of others before ourselves. You know, sometimes I think we're so selfish in this world today, and that's the reason that we don't value other people, because we're all about ourselves. Oh, well, that's his fault. He's in that mess. It's not what God did. It's not what Jesus did. Jesus helped those in their messes. He expects that of us. To say that we have a life crisis in this moment in history would be an understatement. The devaluing of life and our complicit ignoring of this reality is a cancer spreading through the church, the body of Christ. Now you might say, not me. What have you done about it? Dear Lord, I ask you today to touch each and every heart who has listened to this message. Burden us, Lord, with the fact that we are devaluing life in our society. Burden us with the fact that we must, as Christians, do something about it, God. We must speak up for the vulnerable, for the unborn, for the aged, for the discouraged. God, we must speak up for all life, because it is created by you in your image and because you value it, Lord. Lord, be with us as we are going into our worship service this morning. Help us to focus on you, Lord. Bring everyone back to worship you. In your precious name we pray. Amen. We are having worship service on Sunday morning at 11 o'clock at Alexandria Baptist Church, 175 Stadium Drive. We would love to have you. If your church is not having church, or if you just want to find a church to go to, we'd love to have you. We're practicing all the safe social distancing as much as possible. Just come on and enjoy it. So far, we've had no problems, and we want it to continue that way. So just come on and join us. If you want to see some other content, our pastor, Brother Dean Pierce, has his messages on Sundays and Wednesdays on Facebook and YouTube. All you have to do is search Facebook or YouTube by entering Alexandria Baptist Church in the search engine. Thank you so much for being with me.